Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. This game features two of my favourite themes, split rooks and the deadly Octopus Knight. There it is in all its glory. So this is from the FIDE Grand Prix tournament in Berlin, and things are getting to the crucial phase of the group stage. More on standings in a moment, but let's look at this game. Daniil Dubov against Vincent Keymer. Well, we all know Daniil Dubov, fantastically talented, creative player from Russia. He has helped Magnus Carlsen in World Championship matches. And his opponent, Vincent Keymer from Germany, 17 years old and a rising chess superstar. So let's see what happened. Neither player particularly shining at the moment, so both really wanted to play for a win. And, well, they've contrived to play a very, very complex game here. Starts out as a Caro-Kann. Dubov goes for a move, the advanced variation, very trendy at the moment, that keeps lots of tension in the position. Bishop f5. So before black closes this pawn chain, so it's basically we have a French pawn chain here, but with the bishop coming outside the pawn chain, which from a positional point of view, of course, makes a lot of sense for black. The only problem is, of course, it takes time, and while black is playing like this and also attacking white's centre in the typical French way, notice these kingside pieces have not been developed, and the king is a long way from reaching safety by castling. Now here, again, Dubov selects the move which I would say is the most critical. He plays bishop b3, but one can simply support the centre with c3. It's less sharp, but respectable. But bishop b3, so the idea, of course, is to support the d4 pawn. But it could be that later on white still attacks black's centre with c4 to try to exploit this lead in development and open things up, and also, open up this diagonal. So that's why bishop b3 is played. It's actually about rapid development. And Keymer plays queen b6, which again is absolutely the sharpest way to play the position. This is highly theoretical. He's someone that works very hard on his preparation. He has worked, certainly in the past, a great deal with Peter Lecco, who again is someone that is a very diligent researcher, and that has obviously rubbed off on Keymer. As so we can see this queen move, critical, looks at b2, the bishop has moved, and also puts a bit of pressure here. Knight c3, so this knight would like to hop into b5, and then, well, let's see. So for example, after queen takes b2, knight b5 is possible. In fact, queen b1 is the best move. This is crazy because it's a long story, but yeah, queen takes b2, not a good move. Knight c6, more pressure and sensible development, and now black plunges in. Hundreds of games have been played from this position. I know it looks, pretty crazy to go on an adventure with the queen like this, but Keymer is not taking a huge risk in the sense that this is a very well rehearsed position. So queen e1 covers the knight. C takes d4, all actually as played in many dozens and dozens of games. So, white is angling to play this move knight b5. Of course, that hits the queen and threatens a big check. So knight takes bishop. Nice to get rid of that dark squared bishop. And now black needs to develop very quickly, because there's things like bishop b5 check to displace the king. There's also rook b1. There's also potentially knight b5, you know, and let's not forget knight takes bishop as well. So bishop b4, black strikes back with a pin. And now, as I said, dozens of games have been played from this position, and rook b1 is the most popular move. And, well, to cut a long story short, after there's a force sequence which leads to an endgame where white perhaps has a tiny advantage. But instead of that, Dubov plays the other move, which is quite reasonable and extremely dangerous. Knight db5. If you look at this with a powerful machine, then knight b5 is not the best move according to the chess engines. Rook b1 is, according to the machines, the best move. So this is already an interesting idea, but it has been seen in quite a few games. So knight c7 check threatened, and this knight is covered. So bishop a5 covers the c7 square. Rook b1, so now some forcing moves. Rook b1 chasing the queen. So white has given up a pawn, another pawn, but brings the rook to the open c file. Now it's possible to check, but Dubov goes for knight a4, and it's clear that this was preparation. This is a forcing sequence. The knight attacks the queen. This diagonal is opened up. So bishop takes queen, knight takes queen, and now the bishop is attacked. Knight c7, check is threatened, so the bishop hops back. Or I don't know, hops back, but slides back. So we've reached an end game. Material is level, pieces are level, but pawns, black has 2 extra pawns. However, it's white's move, and before black can attempt to consolidate, knight d6 check displaces the king. So the king is going to be stuck in the middle. Knight takes b7. So one pawn is recovered, and white still has the initiative because the bishop is threatened. Now the move one would like to play here is bishop b6, but then if white plays knight a4, threatening to take, and then rook c7 check, black is still in some trouble. So the bishop sort of has to go back to d8 to keep protecting c7, but it's not a beautiful square, obviously. And now knight takes bishop. Now, of course, the move one would like to play is rook takes, but actually that leaves the c7 square available for a check. So, for example, after this, well, let's just throw a few moves in. Rook c7 and rook c1. Then bishop b5, and that's going to force an exchange, and suddenly you can see that black isn't quite in time to get that rook into play. The king is going to have to go back, and suddenly that is taken. It's really nice for white. So in this position, king takes knight. Now, not beautiful because the king sits in the middle of the board, and that will prevent the rooks connecting. However, the king does cover the c7 square, so prevents rook c7. Now here's a big moment in the game. Perhaps you'd like to have a think how you would play with white here. Black is a pawn up. And actually, it's a very solid pawn chain. This is the classic French pawn chain, where well, the only weakness is f7, but how can you actually attack that? So if black can develop, then actually not only will he be a pawn to the good, but it's a very healthy pawn. The problem is time. It's going to take time to connect and coordinate all these forces. In the meantime, white needs to hurry. White needs to find a really good move here, and this seemingly quiet move is spot on. So what exactly is white doing? Well, it's all about bringing this knight into play. This knight is going to exploit the pin to hop into the glorious d6 square. So yeah, we've already had one knight going in there, and now we're going to get knight number 2. So rook b8 hits the knight. Knight c4, exploiting the pin. And here, I think Keymer plays g5. I mean, I think his position is already very tricky to play with black, but g5 seems a little bit too casual. After knight e7, at least that brings the knight into play. I mean, I think white still has a wonderful initiative. But g5 feels like it's really pushing it. The knight goes in. There we go. The Octopus Knight, we've got to show it again. The Octopus Knight is on the board. We love that piece. Hits the pawn, hits the bishop, but also controls these squares around the king. So, for example, it's going to be very difficult. Well, it's impossible to play rook c8 here to challenge this rook on the c-file because the knight controls the c8 square. And this is a classic property of the Octopus Knight, that it just dominates the major pieces. I mean, this one isn't even at the races yet. So anyway, bishop g6 covers everything. Right, so it all looks very beautiful for white, but what next? Well, we need to bring more pieces into the attack. So rook d4 played by Dubov. Excellent move, of course. Potentially swinging across to a4. Knight e7 played. Now, clearly he was concerned about knight f5, and Dubov played g4. In fact, rook a4 is even stronger, according to the computers. But anyway, g4 is, well, let's say a very practical move, a very human move, preventing this one. You might think the obvious move here is to try and exchange off that knight, but watch what happens if black plays knight c8. This is met with a beautiful refutation. Rook b4. So if rook takes knight, and then rook takes rook, and if knight b6, well, the knight remains on d6 for a start once the knight has moved here, and then white could try rook c5 and perhaps come here, or maybe a4 and a5. I mean, it's a really nice attacking position. Of course, the other thing about playing g4 is that it gives the king an escape square as well, which actually was relevant in that variation. In fact, the best move here for black, I mean, it's a very hard position to defend. King d7, and after bishop b5 check, sack back the exchange, or sack an exchange anyway. Now, I think white still has a very powerful initiative here, but black has chances to defend. Anyway, rook b6 played, and Keymer would obviously like to play the rook to c6, or maybe support the knight coming to c6. But watch what happens. Bishop b5. So controls the c6 square. And look at the king. The king actually has no legal move at the moment. And that's harsh. Means these rooks are unable to coordinate. And if you compare it with white's rooks, yeah, so we've got split rooks against very well coordinated rooks here. I mean, they're not quite together at the moment. They were a move ago, but they're working very nicely together. Certainly these, this rook here can't be challenged on the c-file. Rook b8. The rook comes back. Well, okay, that is quite an admission, but things are disastrous for black now anyway. Rook a4 hits the pawn. What happens if rook a8 to defend the pawn? Knight b7 is checkmate out of the blue. Wow, that is quite serious. So knight c8 played. And now Dubov finishes with a flourish. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Once again, mate is threatened. So rook c7. I mean, there's nothing better. Rook check. And the hapless rook on h8 didn't even get to make a move in the game. It gets swiped off. Mate is threatened again. And white, of course, is a clear piece up, so it's absolutely resignable. f6 at least covers this one, but rook c8 is a calm move. Just wanting to exchange that off. Rook a7, and now rook c6, just making room for the knight to come to c8. And well, Keymer quite understandably had enough in this position. In fact, the attack against the king still continues, so white is a piece up, and this is a completely lost position for black. Well, I think a really nice win by Dubov. Apart from my favourite themes, the Octopus Knight and the split rooks, I think this is a good example of modern day opening preparation, that Dubov didn't follow the best computer line in the opening, but he played something that's a little bit under the radar, but is still extremely tricky, very difficult to defend, and Keymer was wrong-footed. There were chances to defend, he could have defended better, but it is really difficult when you're presented with something that poses such practical problems. So let's have a quick look at the standings. So that win brought Dubov up a bit. So in fact, there are 4 groups, and the winner of each group will go into semi-finals and then of course a final. So in this group with Dubov, in fact, Aronian has 3 out of 4. Dubov and Vidit have 2. Keymer's back on 1. So Aronian, with 2 rounds to go, looking pretty good, but Dubov and Vidit still have a chance. In Pool D, Wesley So is out ahead with 3 points, looking good. In Pool B, very close, Fedoseev, Wojtaszek and Rapport. So Fedoseev and Wojtaszek have 2.5, Rapport on 2. Still very close with 2 rounds to go. And in Pool A, also close, but Nakamura is out ahead with 2.5. So I'll be reporting back to give you news about who's qualified for the semi-finals, but it's looking very close at the moment in the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin. Do Google it; you'll find results, and the games are being covered on the major websites anyway, so you can keep up to events if you want to. Thanks for watching.